Welcome to the React full course. In this course, we'll learn how to build complex websites with React. And by the end of this course, we'll build two projects, a chatbot and an e-commerce project. We'll start from the very basics of React, like how to set up React with JavaScript. And we'll learn each feature in detail, step by step. We'll learn the major features of React, as well as advanced features, like how to use React with a backend, deploy React to the internet with AWS, React with TypeScript, and React with AI. You can find the sections of this course below the video here and here. You can also change the speed of the video here. And you can find subtitles for different languages here. And after each lesson, I'll give you a bunch of exercises that you can do on your own to practice the skills that we learned. In total, this course has over 125 exercises. So with that being said, let's get started. I'm going to be doing this course on Windows, but the steps are the same if you're using a Mac. Before we begin, we're going to need two pieces of software. Number one is a web browser, and number two is a code editor. The most popular web browser for web development is Google Chrome, and the most popular code editor for web development is VS Code, so I recommend using these. If you need to install these, you can search for them on Google, click the link, and follow the instructions to download and install. Now, you'll also need to know the basics of JavaScript. React is built on JavaScript, and we're going to be writing a lot of JavaScript when using React. Don't worry, you don't need to be an expert in JavaScript. You just need to know some basic features, like the ones listed here. And I'll also try to review JavaScript features as we go through this course. If you want to learn JavaScript in more detail, you can check out my JavaScript full course in the video description. Finally, you'll need to know the basics of HTML. When using React, we're going to be writing a lot of HTML. Again, don't worry, you don't need to be an expert in HTML. You just need to know some basic features, like the ones listed here. And I'll try my best to review HTML features as we go through this course. If you want to learn HTML in more detail, you can check out my HTML and CSS full course in the video description. If you have any issues in this course, you can check the troubleshooting guide in the description. Now that we have all the requirements that we need, we're ready to learn React. On our computer, we're going to go to our desktop, and we're going to create a new folder. So here, I'm going to right-click and create a new folder. And this folder is going to contain all the code that we write in this course. So let's name it React-course and press Enter. Next, we're going to open this folder in our code editor, VS Code. So we'll open VS Code and then click File, Open Folder, and select the folder we just created. So I created my folder on the desktop, and it's this folder right here. So we'll select this folder, and then click Select Folder. And we can close this welcome page. So now, let's create a new file to learn React. So up here, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to name it react-basics.html, and press Enter. As a review, a file that ends in .html contains HTML code, and this creates a website. Next, we're going to create a website, and we're going to set up React on this website. Now, to save time, we're actually going to download some starting code. So we're going to open our web browser, Google Chrome. And at the top, we're going to type super simple.dev/react-basics and press enter. So this page has some starting HTML code we can use to learn React. So now let's click on this page, and we're going to select all this code by pressing Ctrl-A on Windows or Command-A on Mac. And we're going to copy paste this code into our file. So we'll right-click, copy. We can also press Ctrl-C on Windows or Command-C on Mac. And then open our code editor. And then inside this HTML file, we're going to right-click and paste. We can also press Ctrl-V on Windows or Command-V on Mac. And finally, let's save this file by pressing Ctrl-S on Windows or Command-S on Mac. Next, we're going to open this file in our web browser to see what the website looks like. To make this easier, we're going to use a VS Code extension called Live Server. So the benefit of Live Server is it will automatically refresh the web page whenever we change some code. So it's going to make our coding easier. If you don't have Live Server installed, you can click the extension section and then search for Live Server at the top. And then click Install. Once Live Server is installed, we're going to go back to our code, and we're going to open this file in Live Server by right-clicking in the file and click Open with Live Server. So Live Server will open the HTML file using our browser, and it's going to create a website. And we should see the message, "Welcome to Super Simple Dev React course" on this website. So this message is displayed by React, and this means that we successfully set up React on this website. Now let's go back to VS Code. And this is the minimum amount of code that we need to set up React. We're going to go through this code step by step to make sure that you understand everything here. First of all, what is React? React is an external library that helps us create websites easier. Now, there are two parts to this statement. Number one, React is an external library. And number two, React helps us create websites easier. Let's go through these one by one. So number one, React is an external library. First, let's review what an external library is. So here, we have a bunch of HTML code. And HTML code creates a website. And now, how do we load JavaScript onto our website? There are several ways to load JavaScript on a website. One way is to use an HTML element called a script element. For example, under this div element, let's create a script element using less than script greater than and less than slash script greater than, but our code editor might autocomplete this for us. Now, inside this script element, we can write some JavaScript code. For example, console.log the string hello. As a review, this code displays the text hello in the console. So now let's save, and we're going to open the console in our browser. So we'll open Google Chrome, and Live Server is going to automatically refresh the page and run that JavaScript code. And now we're going to check the console by right-clicking and then click Inspect and open the console tab. And you'll see that inside the console, we displayed the text hello. And that's exactly what this code does. So we successfully loaded this code onto our website. We'll go back to VS Code. So this is one way to run JavaScript code on a website. First, we create a script element, and then we put our JavaScript code inside. Another way to run JavaScript is to save our JavaScript code in a file. So on the left, let's create a new file, and we'll name it react-basics.js and press enter. So when we end a file with .js, this file contains JavaScript code. So now let's move that code into this file. So we'll go to our HTML file. We're going to select this code and then right-click, cut. We can also press Ctrl X on Windows or Command X on Mac. And inside our JavaScript file, we're going to right-click and paste. And save this file. Now, to run the code inside this file, we're going to go back to our HTML. And we're going to add an HTML attribute to this script element. So after this script, we're going to type space and then type src equals double quotes. So the src attribute lets us load JavaScript from a file. Inside these double quotes, we're going to tell the computer which JavaScript file to load. So we'll type react-basics.js. So this will look for a file called react-basics.js beside the current HTML file. So it's going to find the file here, and it's going to run all the code inside this file. So now let's save and open our browser and check the result. Live server will automatically refresh the page, and inside the console, you can see that we display the message hello. So we're successfully loading code from inside a file. We'll go back to VS Code. And this is a second way to load JavaScript. We save our JavaScript in a file, and then we load it from the file. Next, the script element can actually load code from anywhere on the internet, not just on our computer. For example, we're going to open Google Chrome, and then we're going to create a new tab. And at the top, we're going to type unpkg.com/super-simple-dev/external-library.js and press enter. So on this website, we have some JavaScript code. So this is just normal JavaScript code. It displays a message, this is an external library inside the console. So using the script element, we can actually take this code from this website and run it on our own website. To do that, we're going to open VS Code. And inside the src attribute, instead of loading the JavaScript code from a file, we're going to load the JavaScript code from a website. So first, we need the URL of the website. So we'll go back to Google Chrome. And at the top, this is the URL. And we're going to copy. And inside VS Code, we're going to remove this file. And we're going to paste the URL. And now let's save. So now let's go back to our website. And we're going to go to the tab for our website. And we're going to check the console. And inside the console, you can see we displayed the message, this is an external library. So we successfully loaded JavaScript code from another website. Let's go back to VS Code. So using the script element, we can load JavaScript code from anywhere on the internet. So this code is called an external library. An external library is just code that is outside of our computer. It's code that someone else wrote, and we can load that code into our website using the script element. Now, React is an external library. So React is just a bunch of code that is outside our computer that someone else wrote, and we can load this code on our website and use it. So inside our starting file, at the bottom here, these two script elements load the React external library. So it loads react.js and react-dom.js. So let's open these URLs in our browser and take a look. So we're going to select this URL and we're going to copy. And inside Google Chrome, we're going to create a new tab. And at the top, we're going to paste the URL, and press enter. And on this website, you can see that we have a bunch of JavaScript code. So this is the code for React. We're just taking all of this code and then loading it onto our website. Let's go back to VS Code. And the same thing applies to this second URL. If we select it and then copy, and in our browser, create a new tab, and then at the top, paste, and press enter, you can see that this website also has a bunch of JavaScript code. And this is also the code for React. So as you can see, React is an external library. It's just a bunch of code that is outside of our computer that someone else wrote. And we can load this code on our website and use it. Now, before we move on, there's two things you might be wondering about. Number one, why are we loading React from Super Simple Dev instead of some official React URL? So this just lets me control the version of React. If we loaded React from the official URL, you might get a different version of React than the one I'm using in this video, which might cause issues. So for the video, we're going to use a Super Simple Dev URL to make sure that we have the same version of React and you're able to follow along. The second thing you might be wondering is, why are there two external libraries for React, React and React DOM? So React is designed to be used in different places, like websites and also mobile apps. So the creators of React decided to divide it into two external libraries. React, which contains all the shared features that are used in both websites and mobile apps, and React DOM, which contains features that are specific to websites. So if we're using React to create websites, we need to load the React external library and the React DOM external library. If we were using React to create mobile apps, we would load the React external library and a different library called React Native. In this course, we're going to use React to create websites. So we're going to load React and React DOM. Okay, so we learned that React is an external library. It's just a bunch of code that is outside of our computer, and we're going to load it onto our website. The next part is React helps us create websites easier. So now let's learn how to use React. We'll go back to VS Code, and we're going to scroll down, and these two lines of JavaScript at the bottom sets up React. So let's go through this step by step. In the first line, we're using document.querySelector to get an HTML element from the website and put it into our JavaScript. As a review, this is a feature of JavaScript called the DOM, or the Document Object Model. Basically, JavaScript gives us this document object, which sort of combines JavaScript and HTML together. It lets us get HTML elements from the page and put them into our JavaScript, and it also lets our JavaScript modify HTML elements on the page. So the DOM, or the document object, sort of combines HTML and JavaScript together, and it lets the two languages interact with each other. Don't worry, you don't need to know a lot about the DOM to learn React. I'm just explaining what this code does, so you understand what's going on here. So the code document.querySelector lets us get an HTML element from the page and put it into our JavaScript. Inside these brackets, we tell the computer which HTML element we want to get from the page. So if we start with a dot, this means we're going to look for a class. And here, we're looking for the class JS-container. Up here, this div element has the class JS-container, so it's going to take this element and put it into our JavaScript. And finally, we're going to save it inside a variable so we can use it later. Next, let's go to the second line of code, and React DOM.createRoot basically sets up React. To set up React, we have to give it an HTML element. So we're going to give it the element that we saved up here, which is this div element. So basically the way this works is that this element is going to act as a container. Everything that we create with React is going to be displayed inside this element or inside this container. The reason React uses a container is because it keeps things organized. Everything inside this element will be controlled by React, and React will not affect anything outside of this element. So it keeps things isolated and organized. So after we set up React with a container, we can start using the features of React. One feature of React is .render. Render means to display something. So .render lets us display something inside this container or inside this element. Now, between the brackets of render, we're going to tell React what to display inside the container. So right now, we told it to display the text, "Welcome to Super Simple Dev React course." And if we go back to our website and open the tab for our website, and after we open the console, this time we're going to go to the Elements tab. So this lets us see the HTML that's currently on the page. We're going to open this body element, and inside we can see our container. And you can see that React rendered or displayed the message, "Welcome to Super Simple Dev React course," inside our container. So we'll go back to our code. And that's how we set up and use React. First, we give it a container, and then we can display things like a message inside this container. Before we continue, let's review the rest of the code in this file to make sure that we understand every line of code. So the HTML at the top here, as well as the bottom here, this HTML is called the HTML structure. As a review, this is a standard structure that we follow when writing HTML. At the top, doctype HTML tells a computer to use a modern version of HTML. The HTML element represents a website, so all the code for our website should go inside the HTML element. Now, every website is split into two sections, the head section and the body section. The head section generally contains things that are not visible on the page. For example, the title element sets the text at the top of the tab. So this is not visible on the page. So we put this inside the head. The body section generally contains things that are visible on the page. For example, the div element will be visible on the page. So we put it inside the body. Finally, we usually put our script elements at the bottom of the body because we want our HTML to be created first, and then our JavaScript can modify the HTML. So that's a review of the HTML structure. This is a standard structure that we follow when writing HTML. So now we understand almost every line of code in this file. This is just the HTML structure that we have to follow. This is a container that we give to React to keep things isolated and organized. This is an example of an external library, and this loads the React external library, or loads the code for React. And this sets up and uses React. The last two lines that we haven't learned yet are these two lines right here. So here, we're loading another external library, and this external library is called Babel. So again, if I open this URL in my browser, copy, and in my browser, I'm going to create a new tab, and at the top, paste, and press enter, you'll see that this website contains a bunch of JavaScript code. And this is the code for another external library called Babel. So we'll go back to VS Code, and let's learn what is the Babel external library. Babel is known as a JavaScript compiler. So it basically translates other languages into JavaScript. So why do we need Babel? When using React, we actually don't use normal JavaScript. We use an enhanced version of JavaScript called JSX. JSX stands for JavaScript XML. It's the same as JavaScript, but we can also write HTML directly in our JavaScript code. So it's just JavaScript with extra features. So let's do an example of JSX to learn how to use it. Inside the script element at the bottom, we're going to create a new variable using const, and let's call it button, equals, and now let's create a button HTML element. So here, we're going to type HTML directly, less than, button, greater than, and then less than / button, greater than. So this is actually HTML code, and we're writing it directly inside our JavaScript. So this HTML code creates a button, and then inside our button, we can put the text hello. So this code here is actually using JSX. So JSX works the same way as JavaScript, except we can also write HTML directly in our JavaScript code. So what does this code do? It's actually pretty straightforward. This code creates a new button element inside our JavaScript, and then we save it in a variable. We can actually do this with normal JavaScript as well. We can use the DOM, and we can create a button element in our JavaScript like this. So you can think of this JSX code as a shortcut for this JavaScript code. So that's JSX. JSX is an enhanced version of JavaScript. So it's the same as JavaScript, but we can also write HTML directly in our JavaScript code. So when using React, we usually use JSX instead of normal JavaScript, because as you can see, JSX is simpler. Now, there is one problem with JSX, which is our web browser doesn't understand JSX. It only understands normal JavaScript. In order to use JSX, we need to translate it into normal JavaScript first, and then our web browser can understand this code. To do that, we use the Babel external library. Babel translates JSX into normal JavaScript, so our web browser can understand it. To use Babel, we need to do two steps. First, we load the Babel external library, which is what we do here. And then when we want to translate something into JavaScript, we have to give the script element an attribute type equals text/Babel. So this attribute tells Babel to translate all the code inside here into normal JavaScript. So that's what these two lines of code do. First, we load the Babel external library, and then we tell Babel to translate the code from JSX into normal JavaScript, so our web browser can understand it. So now we understand all of the code in our starting file. And again, this is the minimum amount of code that we need to set up React. Next, let's learn some more features of React. So we'll scroll back down, and currently we're using React to display some text inside this container. Now, in addition to text, we can also display HTML elements inside this container. So to do that, we're going to remove this string, and instead, we're going to give render an HTML element. So up here, we actually created an HTML element, or a button. So we're going to give this to the render function. So here, we're going to give it the button. And now it's going to display this button inside our container, or inside this div here. Let's save, and we'll open the browser, and open the tab for our website. and you'll see it displayed the button with the text hello on the website. And if we check the Elements tab, you can see that React displayed the button inside our container. We'll go back to our code. So that's what this code does. It displays an element inside this container. Now let's do another example. Let's display a different HTML element inside this container. So below this button, let's use JSX to create a paragraph element. So first, we'll create a new variable using const, and we'll name the variable paragraph equals, and we'll create a paragraph element using the code less than p greater than less than /p greater than. So this HTML code creates a paragraph or a paragraph of text. Inside our paragraph, let's just put paragraph of text. And now let's display this paragraph on our website. So inside render, instead of the button, we're going to render the paragraph and save. If we open our website, you can see it displayed a paragraph of text. If we go into the Elements tab and we open this div container, we can see that React displayed this paragraph element inside this container. So let's go back to our code. And that's basically how we use React. We give React a container, and then we can display an HTML element inside this container. Next, we're currently using React to display one element at a time on our website, which is not that useful. So now we're going to learn how to use React to display multiple elements on our website. So one thing we can't do is give render multiple elements. So this is not supported. We also can't save multiple elements inside a variable. This is also not supported. Instead, we need to use another HTML element called a div element. So under our paragraph, let's create a new variable using const, and let's name it div, and make it equal, and we'll create an HTML div element using the code less than div greater than less than /div greater than. So this is the HTML code to create a div element. As a review, the div element represents a container. The purpose of a div element is to contain other elements, like buttons and paragraphs. So that's actually why we used a div element up here. This element is a container. It's going to contain everything that we create using React. So let's go back down. Inside our div element, we can put other HTML elements, like a button. So let's actually select this code, and we'll copy, and then inside this div, paste. And let's also put a paragraph element inside our div. So we'll select this code for the paragraph element, and we'll copy, and inside our div, paste. So this code works because a div is considered as one element. So we're just taking one element and saving it in one variable, which is supported in JavaScript. The only thing special about this is that this one element can contain other elements inside. Next, we're going to give this div to the render function here. So instead of the paragraph, we're going to give render our div and save. And if we check our website, you can see that React displayed multiple elements on the website, a button and a paragraph. If we look at the Elements tab and open this div container, you can see that React displayed our div inside this container. Let's go back to our code. And that's how we display multiple elements on a website using React. First, we group the elements inside a div element, and then we render the div element. Before we continue, we're going to do some code cleanup. When we have multiple lines of HTML like this, a best practice is to add brackets around it. So at the front, we're going to add an open bracket, and at the end, a close bracket. And we're going to put the HTML on its own line. So here we have JavaScript and HTML together. We're going to add a new line here by pressing Enter, and we're going to put the HTML on its own line. Same thing here. Click here and press Enter to put the HTML on its own line. Next, we have two elements that are inside a div. So we're also going to give this line an indent by pressing Tab, and then we're going to give this line an indent by pressing Tab, so that it's easy to see that these two elements are inside this div element. So this is how we should format our code when we have multiple lines of HTML. Another way to think about this is inside here, you're actually just writing HTML normally. So don't worry, the more that you use React, the more you'll get used to this format. So let's save this file. Now that we learned the basics of React, let's talk about how React helps us create websites easier. If we look at this code, creating a website with React feels natural. It's a lot simpler than using the DOM feature in JavaScript. We can just create the HTML elements we want directly, and then give it to React, and React will display it on the website. Another benefit is JSX lets us find errors easier. For example, if I misspell button, it will actually tell me that these two don't match, because this is an actual element rather than just text or a string. So it makes it easier to find errors when we're coding. So I'll add the O back. Another benefit is we can insert values inside our JSX elements. For example, inside this paragraph, we're going to type space, and we're going to insert a value here by typing open curly bracket, close curly bracket. And inside here, we can give it any JavaScript code. For example, 2 plus 2. So this will calculate 2 plus 2 and then insert it into this element. If we save and then check our website, we can see that it calculated 2 plus 2, which is 4, and inserted it into this paragraph element. So we'll go back to our code, and that's another benefit of using React. We can insert JavaScript code directly into our JSX elements. So this is similar to string interpolation, where we can insert values into a string. Except here, we're inserting values into actual HTML elements. So those are 3 ways that React helps us create websites easier. Number 1, it's more natural. We can create the elements that we want and then just give it to React and it will put it on the website. Number 2, it helps us find errors easier because these are actual elements. And number 3, we can insert our JavaScript code into our elements. So this helps us use JavaScript and HTML together more easily. Now, React has many other features that helps us create websites easier, but we're going to learn those features later on as we go through the course. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to scroll up and we're just going to remove this example external library and save so that we just have the code that we need for React. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned that React is an external library that helps us create websites easier. We learned how to load the React external library. We learned how to set up React and use .render. We reviewed the basics of HTML and JavaScript. We learned JSX, an enhanced version of JavaScript. We created elements directly with JSX. And we learned how to insert values into our JSX elements. Here are some exercises to help you practice what we learned in this lesson. You can find the solutions to these exercises in the video description. In this lesson, we're going to learn two of the most important features of React, which are components and props. To learn this, I actually prepared a project that we can do for this lesson. We're going to go to our browser, and we can delete these extra tabs for now. And we're going to create a new tab. And at the top, we're going to go to supersimple.dev/projects/chatbot and press enter. This is a chatbot project. We can send a message to a robot up here, and the robot will respond to our message. For example, we can click in here and type, "Hello, chatbot," and then press send. And the robot will respond with, "Hello, how can I help you?" Now, if we scroll to the bottom of this page, we can also move the text box to the bottom by clicking this link. So a lot of chatbot applications use this design, where the text box is at the bottom. However, because we're watching a video, this text box might get cut off, or it might be covered by the video progress bar. So just for this video, we're going to click this again, and we're going to start with the text box at the top. Next, this is a simple chatbot, and currently it can only do three things: get today's date, flip a coin, and roll a dice. For example, up here we can type, "Can you get me today's date?" and press send. And it will respond with today's date. And let's try typing, "How about flip a coin?" and press send. And it will respond with heads or tails.